Imagine commanding 7,000 exhausted soldiers in a 9-kilometer-long column stretched across hostile territory when 30,000 Tatar horsemen, masters of the devastating slave raid, economy that had terrorized Eastern Europe for 250 years, attack your rear guard with the fury of men conducting their final hunt before peace treaties end their centuries-old way of September 8 Mine. 1698 Grand Hetman Felix Kazimierz Potocki faced a 4-to-1 numerical disadvantage against Crimean Khan Kaplan Geradher's raiders, who needed one last successful Jazyr slave capturing expedition before the Treaty of Karlowitz formalized Ottoman territorial losses and closed Polish borderlands to Tatar raiding permanently. Here's what makes this tactically brilliant. Potocki had modernized Polish warfare by embracing Western European tactics, is replacing the traditional cavalry-heavy force with 75% Western-style infantry armed with flintlock muskets and bayonets, backed by disciplined artillery that could strike at 300 meters, while Tatar composite bows maxed out at 150 meters. When the Tatars attacked his vulnerable marching column near Versbov on September 8th, Potocki immediately formed a tabor, a wagon fortress, where vehicles were chained wheel to wheel, creating improvised walls of wood and iron from which musketeers and cannons could fire with. Devastating effect. The September 9th battle at Podhajce saw multiple Tatar assaults shattered by coordinated musket volleys and artillery barrages until the raiders finally broke into the Polish supply camp and said, abandoned tactical discipline to loot rather than press their advantage, allowing Polish forces to rally and counterattack. Result: Tatar casualties likely reached several thousand versus Polish losses under 700, ending the final major slave raid into Poland and securing Polish negotiating power at Karlowitz that reclaimed Podolia after 26 years of Ottoman occupation. To understand why 30,000 Tatar horsemen launched a desperate raid into Poland in 1698, you need to understand the Jazyr system, the slave-raiding economy that had sustained the Crimean Khanate for 250 years of systematic human trafficking on an industrial scale. From 1441 until well into the 1700s, Crimean Tatars rode north and west into the borderlands of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, capturing people by the tens of thousands annually. Those captives? Men, women, children torn from their villages and farms, were marched south in chains to Ottoman slave markets, especially Istanbul and Anatolia. In some years, these raids brought in so many people that the slave markets were flooded, literally lowering prices because supply exceeded demand. That's how central Jazyr was to the Crimean economy. Not just profitable, but foundational. The engine that powered their entire society. Fast forward to 1698, when the world had changed dramatically since Vienna. You probably remember Vienna on September 12. 1683, the Great Siege where King Jan III Sobieski of Poland led a daring relief force that smashed the Ottoman army, threatening the Habsburg capital with 18,000 cavalry charging down the Unis. Kahlenberg Heights, in the largest mounted assault in recorded history. That day marked the turning point that stopped Ottoman expansion into Central Europe permanently. Vienna sparked a united front called the Holy League, a powerful coalition including the Habsburg Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Republic of Venice, and later Russia, with one shared goal: push the Ottomans out of Europe once and for all. For 15 years, The Holy League had been systematically dismantling Ottoman power in the Balkans and Hungary by 1698. Everyone was exhausted and bleeding money and men. Diplomats were already sketching out peace terms that would soon become the Treaty of Karlowitz. But here's the brutal reality of treaty negotiations. In the 17th century, whoever held the ground when the ink dried got to write the rules and shape the new map of Europe. That's why the battle at Podhajce carried so much strategic weight despite involving relatively small forces. Poland needed one last victory to prove it still controlled its southeastern borderlands. The Ottomans and their Crimean Tatar allies needed to show they could still hit back, that they weren't finished yet. For the Crimean Khanate specifically, Kaplan-Jure, I had a much more desperate motive beyond diplomatic posturing. With the Holy League closing in on victory and the Ottomans about to sign a major peace treaty, the Tatars saw the writing on the wall with terrifying clarity once that treaty was signed. Those easy raiding grounds in Poland and Ukraine, the hunting territories where they'd captured hundreds of thousands of slaves over 2 centuries, would be closed forever through formal borders and enforced peace. So, Kaplan-Jure decided to go big one last time, gathering approximately 30,000 Tatar horsemen for what would become the final major Jaisir expedition into Polish lands. It was meant to look like the great raids of old waves of fast, lightly armed cavalry sweeping across the frontier, seizing captives, livestock, and loot before winter closed in and before diplomats closed the borders permanently. But things had changed. The Ottoman Empire, the Tatars' main backer, was now focused eastward on the Russians at Azov, meaning no janissaries, no heavy guns, no fresh supplies from Istanbul. The Tatars were on their own this time, a purely Crimean force, smaller and poorer than the coalition armies that had stormed across these same borderlands a generation earlier. Still, what they lacked in numbers and support, they tried to make up for in speed and desperation. These men lived in the saddle from childhood. Each warrior carried a composite bow, a curved saber, and sometimes a matchlock musket. But their real weapon was mobility. They couldn't storm strongholds or fight prolonged battles, but they could move faster than any regular European army. Their plan was brutally simple: strike deep into Polish territory, take what they could, primarily human captives, and vanish before the Polish troops could pin them down in a set-piece battle. This was their last chance to keep their centuries-old raiding economy alive before European diplomacy killed it forever. Kaplan-Jure rode with his elite bodyguard known as the Orda, the central unit that acted as both headquarters and last line of defense. From here, orders rippled outward through banners waving in the wind and the deep booming rhythm of huge war drums called nagara. That's how a commander could control tens of thousands of men spread over miles of open terrain. But don't picture a dense block of troops shoulder to shoulder. The center stayed relatively thin, like a drawn bow ready to flex. The Crimean forces preferred an open crescent shape, leaving space between units so they could shift quickly, either pulling back to draw enemies into ambushes or fanning outward to envelop flanks at a moment's notice. The crescent shape was the Tatars' signature tactical formation, a masterpiece they'd perfected over centuries of steppe warfare. Then came the wings, the real striking power of the Tatar force. Each side of the crescent held thousands of light horsemen from different tribal clans scattered across the steppe, Nogai, Budiak, Edisen, and others. They were masters of hit-and-run warfare, trained from childhood to ride hard, shoot fast with devastating accuracy from horseback, and vanish before an enemy could respond effectively. Standing against this 30,000-man storm cloud of mobile warfare were approximately 7,000 Polish soldiers gathered near the small frontier town of Podhajce, facing down a Tatar host that outnumbered them more than 4-1. In command was Grand Hetman Felix Kazimierz Potocki, a man often overshadowed by bigger names like King Jan III Sobieski, who had commanded the decisive cavalry wing at Vienna in 1683 and later stopped a massive Tatar assault at Lwów in 1695. But Potocki represented something new, the modern defensive commander who understood that Polish warfare had fundamentally changed. Let's break down what Potocki had under his command, because the numbers reveal a revolution in Polish military thinking. The Polish army at Podhajce wasn't the pure heavy cavalry force of the winged hussar glory days. It was what military historians call a hybrid army, a careful blend of heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry, and flexible dragoons, all backed by a small but capable artillery corps. Infantry formed the backbone. Approximately 75% of Polish foot soldiers were foreign-style infantry units, trained and equipped in the Western European fashion. Most carried Dutch muskets or long pikes, with roughly 2 muskets for every pike. By the 1,690 seconds, they were already switching to flintlock muskets with bayonets, state-of-the-art weapons that let them fire faster and fight hand-to-hand when needed without the cumbersome pike.